Today, I want to talk to you about organizational and team culture. Now, why is culture important in the first place? Well, because culture is really just the shared behavior of a group. When we look at organizational culture, it's really the shared behavior of all the people in the organization. When we look at team culture, it's really a subculture or the shared behavior of a smaller group of people within the organization. Now, Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what that means is the shared behavior of the organization or the shared behavior of your group really determines your success more than a savvy or sophisticated strategy. In the end, the health and alignment of your people with your purpose is the most important thing. So we're going to take a look at 3 different frameworks that's going to help define your organizational and team culture and figure out if there's misalignments and what you can do about it. So let's take a look. And now is where we begin to potentially cause some problems because we're going to look at the iceberg that is our culture. Now, what you may or may not know is that 10% of an iceberg is above the surface or visible, and 90% is invisible or below the surface. Now, there's an area here of murkiness. If you look really hard, you might be able to double click and kind of see into the water a little bit and what's under there. But the reality is, this is a good analogy for a conversation about culture. Culture is made up of 2 really big parts, and that is the artifacts. This is the things that are visible to everyone, and then assumptions. And that's, again, the shared behavior of a group of people. Now, below the surface, all of these things that surround assumptions really reinforce how those assumptions come about, why people act the way they do. A good organization, a healthy organization, has a real alignment between who it says it is or what it asserts and then what the people assume within the organization. So let's take a deeper look. When I say artifacts, I'm talking about things that are visible to anyone outside the organization. These are things like your logo. It's your vision. It's, yes, your website and some of your communications. If you'll notice, other communications are below the line. It is your values, and the values are, again, above and below the line a little bit. What we celebrate is above and below the line a little bit. But all these other things like our vision, our values, our mission statement, our physical building, the way people dress, our style, if we have a manual of style or a brand style guide, those things are important. Our taglines, all of those things are visible and above the line to almost anyone. Now, for insiders, here's a whole other view. It's what lies below the surface. Then we get into strategy and leadership style. And hey, what do we believe? What do we say we believe and really believe and how we act? What do we measure? What do we tolerate? How do we respond to crisis? Decision makings and decision rights. Who gets to do that? Who gets those? Policies, unspoken rules. So you have policies which are written down, and then most organizations have a few unspoken rules that somebody will pull you aside and tell you. All of that says a lot about your culture. Process, reviews, rewards and reprimands, following the money, all these things are important. But here's why. Yes, Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But what we have to understand is where culture's appetite comes from, and that is purpose. Our purpose is really made up when we see our vision, our values, and our mission. When those things align with the rest of the organization, it's a beautiful thing. That means we're healthy and aligned. So the measures that we have should align with our purpose. The policies should align with our purpose. We shouldn't add a bunch of extra policies because someone made a dumb decision. We need to make sure that's in alignment. What happens often in an organization when you see mission drift is process usurps the purpose, or policy usurps the purpose, or a person usurps the purpose. And may that never be. And when we look at our individual team, now we have an opportunity to say, even if the rest of the organization isn't in alignment with purpose, how are we going to make sure that we are together and aligned with purpose? And we've made sure that none of these things are ambiguous. We've made sure that we've brought them to the surface and they're clear to everyone. Because you don't have to leave things there. We can bring these things up to the surface and make sure that we see everything and that groups of people around us begin to see everything. So in our next part of our session, we're going to take a look at our individual team and how we might uncover our purpose and our alignment within the overall culture of the organization. Now I want to talk to you about the Jahari Window. This was named after Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingram. Johari Window. It is not a quadrant, because I know what you're thinking. Hey, this looks like a pretty complicated quadrant. You just showed me an iceberg that had a lot of words on it and told me it was about my culture, and now I'm looking at this. Stick with me, because this is really helpful. If you're sitting there saying, I just wanted you to bring clarity to chaos, I just wanted to deal with this disruptive person in my culture, I need a tool for that. This is your tool. The reason why it's a window and not a quadrant is because each of these window panes are capable of moving and shifting. So it's almost like this is an Etch-a-Sketch. You can move the line left to right and up and down to kind of represent how open your relationship is. And that's where we'll start. Typically, the Johari window is used in a one-on-one relationship evaluation. But what you can also do is use it one to team. If you're leading your team, you can do a self-evaluation as well as evaluate your team, ask them to evaluate themselves and the other members of the team. So let's take a look. You have what is known by you and known by others. That is the open pane. In a healthy culture, in a culture that's able to align, there's a lot of openness. This window is greatly expanded. It expands down into the hidden and expands into blind spots. There are blind spots no more. So blind spots then would be things that are unknown to you but known to others. This can be an issue sometimes with leaders that either don't ask for feedback, or when they do receive feedback, they kind of push back on that and consider it a harsh critique. But what I would encourage you to do is to go ahead and ask questions to move into that. Be positive and be proactive in trying to reduce your own blind spots. And from a team perspective, we need to be willing to do that too organizationally. Now, next, I would say if you're looking at that blind spot, a good exercise might be to think about some things that have been revealed in the past year or two that really changed the perspective of your team, or it was a way that your team found a win because they discovered a blind spot. This is a good activity now to take those down, so it will encourage you to go back and find some more blind spots. Next, I would say let's look at the hidden pane, and that's where we have things that are known only to us. It's not known by others, just to us, but it's hidden from other people. Now, this is good and bad. This is in part your private life, but there's probably things in here that you could have a higher level of disclosure on and would make you more open to your team. All this talk about openness is really about building clarity and trust and getting everybody's assumptions on the same page. If you remember the iceberg, you had the underlying assumptions there. It's important for us to figure that out, because many times the communication breakdown often happens because we make assumptions of why someone is behaving the way they are. And they make assumptions of us why they're behaving the way they are. So it could be something that we're blind to. It could be something that we don't know that is about their personal life. And if we only knew those things, it would explain a lot. That's why it's important for us as a leader to lead out in that. And I'm not saying over disclose or overshare, but I am saying think back into your life on some things that once you did disclose, it made for a more open relationship, a more trusting relationship, and an even better relationship professionally because you shared that thing. So jot that down as a little homework and think about perhaps some things that you could reveal to your team that would help explain maybe why you behave the way you do sometimes. Now, these things can kind of cross because sometimes we have blind spots that someone will reveal to us and we say, oh, well, that's because I have this issue. It may be, I didn't know that I often cover my mouth when I speak. My team revealed that to me as well as my lovely wife and always reminds me of it because I have a tendency to do it when I meet someone new and I'm trying to impress that person. It's almost, I don't know what the reaction is, but by saying that and saying that out loud, it helps me remember that, but it also helps my team help me with that. It was a blind spot until those people brought that out. The last area we have is the unknown to all. It's not known by me and it's not known by my team. And so how do we create new experiences and find new ways of getting a shared discovery of the unknown? Well, it's just that. Sometimes it's new experiences. Sometimes it's bringing in maybe an outside perspective to help us, with that process. And sometimes it's just looking at our data in a different way. Whatever we have at our disposal, we can look at and try to diagnose in a different way. So this is the Johari window. I've given you a few little exercises here. We're going to move on to one last framework that I think is going to be helpful. But as I do, I would encourage you to have something that you go back and do with your team that kind of connects with this. If you're saying, hey, I would love to do something like this, I'd love to create more openness, but I'm not really sure how to do that. And I would say, well, you have something that your team is probably familiar with. There's so many personality tests and assessments out there that almost everybody has done one. If everybody on your team has already done a Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, that's great. Because here's what I want you to do with it. It could be StrengthsFinder. It could also be an emotional intelligence test. Any one of these would be great. But what would be ideal is if that everybody had the same type of test. So it could be everybody's got Myers-Briggs or Enneagram. It doesn't have to be from the same provider. But go back and look at your own assessment and take some time to take a pink or red pen and mark out the things that you're like, hey, this is not me. No tool is great enough to put us exactly in a box. So there's going to be things that are you and that are definitely not you. Next, you'll take a green pen or marker and you're going to underline the things that are definitely you. So this is definitely me. This is definitely not me. The rest of it is probably pretty accurate, but these are really strong feelings. This is definitely not me, or this is definitely me that we're talking about here. Next, what I want you to do is to have your team do the same thing. And then everybody is going to swap their assessments. What this will do is provoke some really great conversations that reveal some blind spots and hidden spots for you and your leadership and your team. Now, you have to be fairly trusting in order to do this, of course, because you don't want these things to be used against you. I totally get that. Some people are really private and they're like, oh, I don't want anybody to read this. It's like reading my mail. Well, this is an exercise that we want to do as a team. It's part of maybe your review process or whatever it is. I would really encourage you to do that because it's going to encourage you, because you're going to have things that you didn't even know were strengths. You didn't mark it as a strength, but it was in that profile and everybody on your team marked it as a strength. Or perhaps you might have a few things that you didn't mark as a weakness, but those are revealed as well. So it's an important exercise and will really help people get on the same page and understand each other a little bit more. When we talk about this, we're talking about assumptions. We are talking about shared behavior. We're talking about culture. And healthy people can then align with a healthy culture. If your culture is so shut down that it won't allow something like this, overall, I would really encourage you to try to do it with your team. So let's get to that final framework that we can use to move our team forward. To wrap this up, we're going to take a look at our culture alignment. So we want to look at 4 key areas: story, strategy, structure, and systems. The very first thing I want you to do is give yourself a rating on 1 to 5 whether or not these areas are currently in alignment with your culture. Story alignment is the first and foremost. It's the most important. Why? Because culture eats strategy for breakfast, but it gets its appetite from purpose. And our purpose is our vision, mission, and values. Those things that we espouse. Do we espouse stories that go along with our mission, vision, and values, that go along with our purpose? Secondly, when we double click on that and we look at it from a team standpoint, we want to make sure that we as a team have some stories to tell that align with that vision, mission, and values of our organization. And often those can be used for the whole organization if we identify those and make sure we understand those clearly. Next, we'll look at strategy. Strategy is often overlooked because we tend to put a strategy in play, and as long as it's working reasonably well, we don't really mess with it. It can go years before we take a look and say, hey, does this align with where we're going? Does it align with a culture that we're trying to create? So take a look at that, especially if it got a lower score. Next, I would say looking at your structure is really important, even if you have a small team. This is easy for a larger team because they automatically think of reporting issues. They think of silos within an organization. But I would say even a smaller team can really get misaligned on culture and the way it's structured really quickly. When we look at systems, this is the day-to-day work that you do. It is not necessarily a skill set. It's more about the processes and procedures and how we actually get things done. At first glance, you may say, oh, I don't want to mess with those. It's the way, it is our day-to-day work. It is the way we get things done. But I would say even there, that is one of the key drivers of culture. If I would say there's 2 things up here that make the most difference, it's story and systems, because this affects your day-to-day work and it affects your culture more than anything else. So I hope you have found this really helpful in addressing your culture, because as leaders, it doesn't matter where you are in the organization, a key part of your job is creating and cultivating a good team culture.